For 32 years. That sentence was just a ghost story, I told myself. A fragmented memory of a cold bank vault I wasn't sure was real. Don't open the locked one, Daddy, but standing in his silent bungalow, holding the small silver key he left behind, the joke died with him. He had faithfully obeyed my toddler warning for my entire life. Now, with him gone, I was the only one left to finally disobey it. The fluorescent lights of the logistics office always hummed with a sound that felt like a headache waiting to happen. It was a Tuesday afternoon in mid-October, and the sky outside the warehouse windows was the color of a wet sidewalk. I stared at the spreadsheet on my monitor, tracking a shipment of HVAC units destined for a construction site 3 counties over, and felt the familiar, comforting weight of boredom. This was my life in Mapleford. It was safe. It was predictable. It was exactly what I had designed for myself after 25 years of watching my father, Daniel, flinch at sudden noises and apologize for taking up space. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was Ryan. I picked it up, smiling reflexively, even though we had been divorced for 2 years. Ryan was still my best friend. We just hadn't been very good at being married. "Hey," I said, cradling the phone between my ear and shoulder as I typed a shipping code. "Did you grab her or got her?" Ryan said. His voice was breathless, likely from wrestling our 5-year-old into her car seat. "She is currently demanding chicken nuggets. I told her it is a taco night. Negotiations are ongoing." I laughed. "Good luck. Drop her off around 6. 6 works." He said, "Hey, how was dinner with Daniel on Sunday? You seemed quiet when you dropped Emma off yesterday." I stopped typing. The cursor blinked at me, a rhythmic black line against the white cell. "It was fine," I said, but the lie tasted like chalk. "It was just," he was weird. Weird how Ryan asked, just fidgety. He kept talking about Mom. Ryan fell silent for a moment. He knew the geography of my family history better than anyone. He knew that my mother, Laura, was a topic usually preserved in amber, admired from a distance, never touched. She had died when I was 10, leaving behind a silence in our house that Daniel had filled with work and I had filled with books. Maybe he's just getting older. "Claire," Ryan said gently. Nostalgia kicks in. "Maybe," I said. "See you at 6. I hung up. But the unease I had felt since Sunday flared up again, settling in the pit of my stomach. Sunday dinner was a ritual. It was the anchor of my week, a fixed point that never moved. I would drive the 15 minutes from my apartment to the small, shingled bungalow on the edge of town where I had grown up. The house always smelled the same, like lemon furniture polish and old paper. But this past Sunday had been different. When I arrived, the table wasn't set. This was unprecedented. Daniel Henderson was a man of meticulous routine. He found comfort in the predictable. Usually, the pot roast would be resting, the green beans would be steaming in the ceramic bowl with the chip on the rim, and he would be wiping his hands on a dish towel, waiting for me. Instead, I found him in the living room, standing by the window, staring out at the overgrown lilac bush in the neighbor's yard. He was wearing his good shirt, the one he usually saved for church or Christmas, and his hands were trembling slightly at his sides. "Dad," I had said. Dropping my keys on the console table, he jumped, spinning around as if I had caught him stealing. "Claire," he breathed, "you are early. I am right on time." "Dad, 5 o'clock, like always." He blinked, his eyes watery and unfocused. "Right, 5 o'clock. We ate in the kitchen." The silence between us thick and heavy. He barely touched his food. He kept looking at me, really looking at me, in a way that made me want to check if I had spinach in my teeth. It was a searching look, desperate and sad. "You look like her today," he said suddenly. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. Everyone said I looked like Daniel, the same dark hair, the same serious jawline. I had only a few photos of my mother, and in them, she looked ethereal, blonde and laughing. Nothing like my solid, practical self. "I don't think so." "Dad," I said. "But thanks." "No," he insisted, his voice gaining a strange, frantic energy. Around the eyes, You have her way of watching things. She was always watching, calculating. He put his fork down with a clatter. She was braver than either of us. Claire, you have to know that. I put my own fork down. My appetite gone. Dad, are you okay? Did something happen at the warehouse? He shook his head, looking down at his plate. I should have told you. Years ago, I thought I was protecting you. But now, he stopped. He took a breath that shuddered in his chest, and then, as quickly as the window had opened, he slammed it shut. He picked up his fork and stabbed a piece of potato. Never mind, he said, his voice dropping back to its usual flat, apologetic timbre. Eat your roast. It will get cold. I had pressed him. Of course, I asked him what he meant. I asked him what he should have told me, but he just smiled that weak, crumbling smile of his and asked me about work. He asked about Emma. He walled himself off, retreating into the safety of the mundane. Driving home that night, the streetlights of Mapleford blurring into streaks of amber against the rain-slicked windshield. I had felt a sudden, sharp dislocation. It happened when I passed the old credit union building on 4th Street. It wasn't even the same bank. But something about the heavy stone facade and the iron bars on the windows triggered a synapse I didn't know I still had. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. Cold. That was the first sensation, a deep, subterranean chill that smelled of dust and steel. I was small. My hand was engulfed in my mother's hand, her grip tight, almost painful. I was looking up at rows of metal boxes, endless silver rectangles stacked floor to ceiling. Daniel was there. He looked younger, his back straighter, but his face was pale. He was holding a key. It wasn't a normal key. It was long and flat. My mother crouched down. I could smell her perfume, vanilla, and something sharper, like expensive soap. She turned me toward my father. Tell him. Claire, she whispered. Her voice was urgent, trembling with a suppressed energy I didn't understand. Tell Daddy the rule. I didn't want to speak. The room was too big and too quiet, but my mother squeezed my hand. Say it, baby, please. I looked at my father. He looked terrified. Don't open the locked one. Daddy? I chirped. My voice was high, a toddler's piping sound. My mother stood up then, nodding at him. Her face was hard, like stone. He nodded back, defeated, and slipped the key into his pocket. The locked one, she said to him, her voice echoing in the vault. Promise me, Daniel. The memory had faded as I turned onto my street, leaving me shaken. I had parked the car and sat there for 10 minutes. Gripping the steering wheel, I had always dismissed that memory as a dream, or a fragment of a family joke I didn't get. Don't open the locked one. It sounded like something from a fairy tale, not a real event in the life of a project coordinator in a mid-sized Ohio town. Now, sitting at my desk on Tuesday, I tried to shake off the feeling again. It was just stress. Daniel was getting older. I was tired. It meant nothing. I turned back to my spreadsheet. I typed in the tracking number for the HVAC units. Then the phone rang again. It wasn't Ryan this time. The number on the display was local, but unfamiliar. Claire Henderson, a voice asked. It was a woman, professional but strained. Yes, this is Sergeant Miller with the Mapleford Police. I am afraid I have some bad news. The world stopped. The hum of the lights ceased. The smell of dust and cardboard vanished. There was only the voice. It is your father, she said. He had been at work. He had walked out to his truck to get his thermos during his break. He had collapsed between a pallet of drywall and a parked sedan. Massive cardiac arrest. They said he was dead before he hit the asphalt. The next 3 days were a blur of beige walls and hushed voices. I moved through the motions like a robot. I identified the body. I signed the papers. I chose the casket oak. Simple. Something he wouldn't think was too flashy. I explained to Emma that Grandpa Daniel had gone to be with Grandma Laura. I held her while she cried, but I didn't cry myself. I felt hollowed out, as if someone had reached inside my chest and scooped out everything vital, leaving only a shell that walked and talked and signed checks. The guilt was a low-grade fever I couldn't shake. I kept thinking about Sunday. I had driven away. I had let him retreat. I had seen the fear in his eyes, and I had let him change the subject to the weather. "I should have told you," he had said, and now he never would. And then Aunt Margaret arrived. She descended on Mapleford like a weather system. Margaret Carlyle, my mother's older sister, lived in a gated community 2 towns over, but she acted as if she were visiting from a different planet, one where standards were higher and disappointments were fewer. I was sitting at my kitchen table on Thursday morning, staring at a list of hymns for the service. When she let herself in, she still had a key, a relic from when she used to babysit me 20 years ago. "Claire," she announced, slamming the door behind her. "Why is it so dark in here?" She marched to the window and threw open the curtains. The gray morning light flooded in, exposing the dust motes dancing in the air. Margaret was 60, but she fought it with expensive dye jobs and a rigid Pilates regimen. She wore a black suit that looked like it cost more than my car, and her hair was a helmet of stiff, blonde lacquer. "Hello, Aunt Margaret?" I said, not looking up from the list. She came over and plucked the paper from my hand. "Amazing Grace," she scoffed. "How original." Laura hated that song. She said it was dirge-like. "We will do it as well with my soul. It has better pacing." She pulled a pen from her purse and crossed out my choice with a sharp, violent slash. I took the paper back. Dad liked Amazing Grace. Daniel liked whatever didn't cause a fuss. Margaret said, sitting down opposite me. She looked at me with eyes that were the same shade of blue as my mother's, but hard as marbles. "Look at you. You look exhausted. Just like when Laura passed. I had to do everything then, too. Do you remember Daniel was useless? He just sat in that chair and stared at the wall. I had to pick the flowers, the plot, everything. I remember," I said quietly. I remembered her moving through our house, packing up my mother's clothes before the funeral was even over. "It is better this way," she had said, throwing Laura's soft cardigans into black trash bags. "No need to wallow. I am here to help." "Claire," she said, though it sounded like a threat, "we need to talk about the reception. I have ordered catering from the Gilded Fork. Those little sandwiches Daniel liked are trash. We need something respectable. I don't have the money for the Gilded Fork." "Margaret," she waved a hand, the diamonds on her fingers catching the light. "I will handle it. Consider it my contribution. I know Daniel didn't leave much. He never was good with money. If it hadn't been for me helping him manage things all these years, God knows where you would be. Manage things, I asked. What things? Margaret stiffened slightly. "Just family matters, ensuring there was enough to keep you afloat." "Don't worry about it. You focus on Emma. How is the poor thing? Does she understand that she is not going to see him again? She is 5. Margaret. "She understands enough." Margaret sighed, a sound of supreme martyrdom. "Well, I will go to the florist. Lilies, lots of them. It covers the smell of the old church." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Oh, and Claire." "Yes, don't go digging through his papers yet. It is too morbid. I will come over on Saturday after the service and we can sort through the finances together. I know how Daniel filed things. It will be faster if I help." Something in her tone, a slight sharpness. A rush to close the topic made the hair on my arms stand up. "I will wait." I lied. "Good girl," she said. The funeral was on Friday. It was a small affair. Daniel had friends guys from the warehouse, a few neighbors, but he wasn't a man who made a splash. The chapel smelled of the lilies Margaret had ordered. The scent was cloying, almost suffocating. I sat in the front pew, Emma on one side of me, Ryan on the other. Margaret sat on the other side of Emma, weeping delicately into a lace handkerchief. I stared at the coffin. It looked too small to hold a whole life. When the service ended, people filed past to shake my hand and murmur the usual platitudes. He was a good man. So sudden. If you need anything. I nodded and thanked them, my face numb. Then, a woman I didn't recognize stepped out of the line. She was older, perhaps in her late 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and a wool coat that had seen better days. She wasn't looking at the coffin. She was looking at me. Her eyes were intense, intelligent, and filled with a sorrow that felt ancient. "Claire," she asked. "Yes," I said. "Did you work with Daniel?" She shook her head. "No, I knew your mother. A long time ago." She stepped closer, glancing nervously toward where Margaret was holding court with the pastor near the altar. Margaret's back was turned. "My name is Irene Cole," the woman said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I just wanted to see you. Thank you for coming," I said automatically. Irene reached out and touched my arm. Her hand was cold. "Your mother thought you would be ready by now," she said. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "Ready," she repeated, urgency creeping into her tone. She looked over my shoulder, saw Margaret turning around, and pulled her hand back as if burned. "I am sorry for your loss," Irene said loudly. Stepping back. "Wait," I said. "What did you mean?" But she was already moving, weaving her way through the crowd of warehouse workers. Head down, disappearing into the gray afternoon light. "Who was that?" Ryan asked, stepping up beside me. "I don't know," I said, watching the door swing shut behind her. After the burial, everyone went to the community center for the reception Margaret had orchestrated. I stayed for an hour, accepting condolences, watching Emma eat too many cookies, and listening to Margaret tell a story about how she used to pay for Daniel's car repairs because he just couldn't get his act together. At 4:00, I couldn't take it anymore. "Ryan," I said, "can you take Emma for the night?" "Of course," he said immediately. "You need to crash. I need to go to the house." I said, "I need to just be there. Before Margaret comes tomorrow and turns it into a project, I will take Emma. Go." I drove to the bungalow. The driveway was empty. Daniel's truck was still at the impound lot where they had towed it from the warehouse. I let myself in. The silence greeted me. It wasn't a peaceful silence anymore. It felt heavy, expectant. I walked through the living room, past the armchair where he had sat on Sunday, and went into the small second bedroom he used as an office. It was a cluttered space. Stacks of Popular Mechanics magazines, a jar of screws, a dusty computer he rarely used. His filing cabinet was an old metal beige beast in the corner. Margaret had told me not to look. "I will come over on Saturday. It will be faster if I help." I walked over to the desk. I started with the top drawer. Pens, rubber bands, a stapler. Second drawer, utility bills, organized by month. He was meticulous about that. Third drawer, tax returns. I pulled them out. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the paper trail of a quiet life. There were no secrets here. Just a man trying to make ends meet on a warehouse salary. I turned to the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. It was stuck. I yanked it, and it groaned open. Inside, tucked all the way at the back behind a folder labeled warranties, was a thick manila envelope. It didn't look like the others. It was old, the paper soft and worn at the corners. I pulled it out. There was no label on the outside. I opened the clasp. Inside, there was a single bank envelope from Alder Community Bank, and a key. I dumped them into my lap. The key was small, silver, and flat. It had a yellow tag attached to it with a piece of wire. On the tag, written in black marker that had faded to gray, were 2 words. Locked 1. My breath hitched. I picked up the bank envelope. Inside was a piece of notebook paper, folded in thirds. I unfolded it. The handwriting was my father's, spiky, cramped, familiar. "Claire, box you once told me not to open. If you are reading this, it is yours now. I am sorry I waited so long. Dad." The room seemed to tilt. The voice in my head wasn't mine. It was the toddler's voice from the memory. "Don't open the locked one. Daddy." It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a joke. It was real. I stared at the key. Locked one. My mother had made me say it. She had made me the guardian of this box when I was barely old enough to speak. She had used me to bind my father to a promise. I am sorry I waited so long. Waited for what? To tell me to open it. I looked at the date on the bank envelope. It was postmarked from Northbridge, the town next to ours. I checked the date on the stamp. It was recent, just last month. I scrambled up and went to the computer. I woke it up. the screen glowing blue in the dim room. I typed Alder Community Bank into the search bar. It still existed, a small, regional bank with one branch in Northbridge. I went back to the filing cabinet. I started pulling out his bank statements from the main pile. I went back 5 years, 10 years. There it was, every year. In April, a fee of $50. Safe deposit box rental. I kept going back. 20 years, 30 years. He had paid it every single year. I found a statement from when I was 12. That was a bad year. The warehouse had cut hours. We had eaten spaghetti with butter for weeks because we couldn't afford sauce. The electricity had been turned off for 3 days in November. I looked at the statement for that April. Safe deposit box rental, $35. He had paid it. He had paid to keep this box when we were freezing in the dark. Why? What could possibly be in a box that was worth more than heat, worth more than food? And why had he never opened it? Box you once told me not to open. He had listened to me. He had listened to the 2-year-old version of me, guided by my dead mother's hand. He had kept it sealed for 32 years. I looked at the key in my hand. It felt heavy, heavier than steel should feel. It felt like a burden being passed. Your mother thought you would be ready by now. Irene Cole's words echoed in the quiet room. She knew. She knew about the box. I stood up. I paced the small room. Margaret was coming tomorrow. She would want to go through these files. She would find the bank statements. She would see the fees. If I told her, she would take over. She would say, "Oh, just some old junk. Claire, I will handle it." But Daniel hadn't left this note for Margaret. He had left it for me. If you are reading this, it is yours now. I felt a surge of something hot and sharp in my chest. It was fear. Yes, but it was also anger. My parents had been playing a game with my life for 3 decades. They had secrets, codes, locked doors. They had decided what I could know and when I could know it. Well, I was 32 years old. I was the one paying the mortgage on my own life. I was the one burying my father. I walked over to the desk and grabbed the key. I shoved it into the pocket of my jeans. I took the note and the envelope and put them in my purse. I wasn't going to wait for Margaret. I wasn't going to ask for permission. I looked at the clock. It was 8 in the evening. The bank was closed. But tomorrow was Saturday. Alder Community Bank was open until noon on Saturdays. I am going. I whispered to the empty room. I owed it to the terrified man who had stood in that vault 32 years ago. I owed it to the woman who had made him promise. And I owed it to myself to find out why I had been raised in the shadow of a secret I didn't even know I was keeping. I turned off the computer. I turned off the light. I walked out of the bungalow, locking the door behind me. The key to the house felt light and familiar on my ring. But the key in my pocket, the key to the locked one, burned against my hip like a live coal. The drive to Northbridge took 30 minutes, but it felt like I was traveling back in time. The road wound away from the suburban sprawl of Mapleford, past strip malls and gas stations that slowly gave way to open fields and dense patches of woodland. The sky was a bruised purple, threatening rain, and the heater in my car rattled against the silence. I had the key in my pocket. I kept reaching down to touch it, running my thumb over the jagged teeth and the smooth, cold metal of the head. It was a talisman, or maybe a curse. I wasn't sure yet. Northbridge was a town that had seen better days. It was older than Mapleford, built around a textile mill that had closed 20 years ago. The main street was lined with brick buildings that housed antique shops, a dusty pharmacy, and a diner that looked like it hadn't changed its menu since 1985. Alder Community Bank sat on the corner of Main and Elm. It was a fortress of a building, constructed from heavy gray stone with iron grates over the windows. It looked like a place where secrets went to be buried. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I felt like an imposter. I was Claire Henderson, a project coordinator who worried about shipping schedules and dental appointments. I wasn't a detective. I wasn't the heroine of a Gothic novel. I was just a daughter who had found a key she wasn't supposed to have. but the memory of my father's face, the fear in his eyes at that last Sunday dinner propelled me forward. "I should have told you," he had said. I got out of the car. The air smelled of rain and wood smoke. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the bank. Inside, the silence was absolute. It was the kind of quiet that feels expensive. The floors were marble, worn smooth by generations of feet, and the tellers worked behind high counters of polished mahogany and brass. It smelled of old paper and peppermint. A woman was sitting at a large desk near the vault entrance. She looked up as I approached. She was in her late 50s, with salt and pepper hair cut in a sensible bob, and glasses perched on a chain around her neck. Her nameplate read, "Joan Miller, branch manager." "Can I help you?" she asked. Her smile polite but professional. I cleared my throat. My voice felt small in the cavernous space. "I am here about a safe deposit box," I said. "My father passed away earlier this week. I found the key in his things." Joan's expression softened instantly. "Oh, I am so sorry for your loss. It is never easy. Do you have the death certificate and your identification?" I nodded and pulled the folder from my bag. I handed her the death certificate, the letter of testamentary that Mark Ellis, the lawyer I had briefly consulted, had helped me rush, and my driver's license. She took them and adjusted her glasses. "Let me just look up the account. What was his name?" "Daniel Henderson." I said. Joan's hands paused on her keyboard. She looked up at me, her eyes widening slightly behind the lenses. "Daniel," she repeated. "You are Claire." "Yes," I said, surprised. Joan sat back in her chair. She took off her glasses and let them hang by the chain. "I knew your father," she said softly. "He came in here every April, like clockwork, for years." I felt a chill ripple through me. "Every April, the second week of April," she said. "Usually on a Tuesday or Wednesday. He would come in, pay the fee in cash, and ask to go into the vault. He never stayed long, maybe 5 minutes, just enough time to check that the box was still there." Did he ever open it?" I asked. Joan shook her head. "Not in the 20 years I have been manager here. Sometimes, back in the beginning, before my time as manager, but when I was a teller. I remember seeing him with a woman, blonde, very striking. My mother." I whispered. Joan nodded. They would go in together. But after she passed, I assumed that was her. He always came alone, and he never opened it. He just visited it, like a grave. She turned back to the computer and typed in a few commands. The printer behind her whirred to life. "Here it is," she said, studying the screen. "This is unusual." "What is it?" I asked, leaning forward. "Most safe deposit boxes are simple rentals," she explained. "You pay the fee, you get the key, but this one has specific riders attached to the access protocol. It was flagged in our system." She turned the monitor so I could see. Account holder, Laura Carlisle Henderson. Co-owner, Daniel Henderson. Beneficiary, Claire Henderson Minor. My mother's name was first. It was originally opened by your mother. Joan said, 32 years ago. That would be 1994, the year I was born. I said, "Exactly," Joan said. "And look at the notes here." She pointed to a block of text in the comments field. It was scanned from a handwritten document. Box must remain locked unless opened by surviving spouse and child together, or by Claire alone after the death of both spouses. I stared at the words. Together. That explains it, I said, my voice trembling. That is why he never opened it. He couldn't. He needed me. Technically. Yes, Joan said. If he had brought you in, he could have opened it, but he never did. He just paid the rent and made sure it was safe. She stood up and grabbed a ring of master keys from her drawer. "Well, Claire," she said gently, "you are here now, and sadly, the condition of both spouses passing has been met. You have the right to open it." She walked around the desk. "Shall we?" I stood up, my legs feeling like lead. I followed her across the marble floor toward the heavy steel gate that separated the lobby from the vault. Joan unlocked the gate with a clatter that echoed off the high ceiling. We walked down a short corridor and stopped in front of the massive circular vault door. It was open, revealing a wall of steel boxes. The air inside the vault was cooler than the lobby. It was climate-controlled, dry and still. Joan walked down the rows, checking the numbers against the key I had given her. "Box 402, she murmured. "Here we are." She pointed to a box at eye level. I stepped closer. There, right next to the number plate, was a small, round sticker. It was red, or it had been once. Now it was a faded, dusty pink, and written on it, in ink that had turned brown with age, was a single word locked. The breath left my lungs in a rush. "Don't open the locked one. Daddy." It was real. The memory wasn't a hallucination. It was this specific box, this specific sticker. Joan noticed me staring at it. "You know," she said, her voice conversational but hushed, looking at the sticker. "I was a junior teller when this box was set up. I remember your mother asking for that sticker. It was highly irregular. We don't usually let customers put stickers on the bank property." She smiled faintly. "But she was very insistent. She had you on her hip. You couldn't have been more than 2. She looked at me and said, 'My daughter will know which one not to open until it is safe.' She made me promise to leave it there." I reached out and touched the sticker. The paper was brittle, flaking slightly under my fingertip. "Until it is safe," I repeated. I pulled the key from my pocket. My hand was shaking so badly I wasn't sure I could fit it into the lock. Suddenly, I couldn't do it. I pulled my hand back, clutching the key against my chest. "I can't," I said. Joan looked at me, her expression unreadable. "Why not?" she asked softly. "He didn't want it opened," I said. The words tumbled out of me, a mix of my father's anxiety and my own fear. "He spent 30 years guarding this. He paid for it when we didn't have money for groceries. He was terrified of it. If I open it, I am betraying him." I looked at the steel door of the box. He said to me once, "Some doors, once opened, can't be shut again." What if I open this, and I hate what I find? What if it changes how I see him? I felt a surge of anger then, hot and sudden. "And why did they do this to me?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Why did they leave me a riddle instead of a conversation? Why did my mother make me a part of this when I was a baby? It isn't fair." Joan waited for my outburst to settle. She didn't look shocked. She looked like a woman who had spent 30 years watching people interact with their secrets. "Claire," she said. I looked at her. "Your parents are gone." She said, "They made their choices. They decided to lock whatever this is away, but they also decided to give you the key." She gestured to the box. "Your father left you the note. He said it was yours. That is permission. But what if I am not ready?" I whispered. Joan thought for a moment. Then she stepped closer. "How about a compromise?" she suggested. I looked at her. "A compromise. We open the box," she said. "We slide it out. I will look inside first. I will tell you if there is anything that looks like it requires immediate legal attention, a will with an expiration, a bond, something dangerous. If it is just letters or photos, you don't have to read them right now. You can take the contents, put them in a bag, and decide later. You don't have to read them in this vault. I considered this. It offered a way forward without forcing me to confront the ghosts immediately. "Okay," I said. "Okay, let's do that." Joan nodded. She inserted her master key into the first lock. I inserted my key into the second. "Turn on 3, she said. 1, 2, 3. We turned the keys simultaneously. The lock clicked, a heavy, satisfying sound of steel disengaging. Joan pulled the door open. Inside was a long, narrow metal box. She slid it out. It made a scraping sound, metal on metal, like a sword being drawn from a scabbard. She carried it to a small table in the center of the vault. I followed, keeping my distance as if the box might explode. Joan opened the lid. She peered inside. She didn't touch anything yet. She just looked. "Well," I asked, my heart in my throat. "There is nothing dangerous," she said. "No cash, no jewelry that I can see." She stepped back. "Take a look." I walked to the table and looked down. The box wasn't full. The contents were neat, organized, and terrifyingly mundane. On top lay a thick, white envelope. It was sealed with clear tape that had yellowed and cracked with age. On the front, in handwriting that was elegant and looping my mother's handwriting, I realized with a jolt, were the words, "For Claire at 30 plus 30 plus." She had anticipated I would be at least 30 before I saw this. Next to the envelope was a small, padded pouch, the kind you might use for a pair of sunglasses. Taped to it was a sticky note video for Claire. Underneath those items was a stack of papers clipped together. They looked like photocopies. The paper was that old, slick thermal kind that fades over time, but these had been preserved by the darkness, and at the bottom, folded into a square, was a large sheet of paper that looked like a map. I reached in, my fingers trembling. I touched the map first. I unfolded it carefully. It crinkled loudly in the quiet vault. It was a land survey. I recognized the lines and the topography immediately. It was a map of Lake Alder and the surrounding woodlands. I knew this area. It was where the wealthy people from Northbridge built their summer cabins. It was where Margaret took us for that awkward family vacation last year. I looked at the header of the survey. Carlisle Family Trust Parcels. Survey date August 1993. Carlisle. Margaret's maiden name. My mother's maiden name. I scanned the map. There were parcels outlined in red ink. Huge tracts of land along the eastern shore of the lake. I looked at the legal documents clipped together. I didn't read them, but I saw the headers. Declaration of trust, deed of transfer, power of attorney. This wasn't a diary. This wasn't a collection of love letters. This was business. I looked at the envelope again. For Claire at 30 plus. The date on the back of the envelope was stamped by a notary. October 14th, 1994. I did the math. I was born in June of 1994. This envelope was sealed 4 months after I was born. My mother had locked this away when I was an infant. She had hidden land records and trust documents in a bank vault and made me the guard dog. I felt a wave of nausea. Margaret always said the Carlyles were land rich and cash poor. She said the family money had dried up years ago. She said she had built her development company, Northbridge Ridge Developments, from scratch. But here was a map of the land Margaret's company was currently building luxury condos on, labeled Carlisle Family Trust Parcels, locked in a box my father had been terrified to open. I looked at Joan. She was watching me with concern. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "I don't know." I said honestly, "I don't think so." I reached for the envelope. I held it in my hand. It felt heavy, dense with pages. "I can't read this here." I said, "I can't be in this vault anymore." "Of course," Joan said. "You can take the contents. We just need to sign a release form." I nodded. I grabbed the padded pouch and the stack of documents. I put the map back on top of the pile. I didn't look at the bottom of the box. I didn't want to see if there was anything else. I just wanted to get out. I gathered everything up. I had brought Daniel's old leather briefcase, the one he used to carry his lunch in, and I shoved the papers inside. It felt like I was looting a grave. We walked back to the front desk. The process of signing the release felt surreal. I signed my name, Claire Henderson, on 3 different lines. I watched Joan stamp the forms. Date of access, October 20th, 2026. Contents removed, yes. Thank you. "Joan," I said, hoisting the briefcase onto my shoulder. She reached out and squeezed my hand. Her skin was dry and papery. "Take your time." "Claire," she said, "whatever is in there has waited 30 years. It can wait another night." I walked out of the bank and into the gray afternoon. The rain had started to fall, a cold, spitting drizzle that misted the windshield of my car. I threw the briefcase onto the passenger seat. I drove out of Northbridge fast, watching the stone buildings recede in my rearview mirror. I felt like I was smuggling something illicit. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a police car, or maybe Margaret's silver Mercedes, following me, but the road was empty. By the time I got back to my apartment in Mapleford, it was dark. The apartment was quiet. Ryan had texted me earlier, "Emma is down for the count." We made tacos. She ate 3. "Hope you are okay," I didn't reply. I couldn't bridge the gap between his normal, happy domesticity and the cold weight of the briefcase in my hand. I locked the door and deadbolted it. I closed the blinds. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of red wine. I filled it to the brim. I sat down at the small circular table where I usually ate cereal and paid bills. I placed the briefcase in the center of the table. I opened it. The smell of the vault dust and old paper wafted out, clashing with the smell of my lavender fabric softener. I took out the items: the envelope, the padded pouch, the legal documents, the map. I spread them out. They looked innocent enough, just paper and plastic, but they radiated a kind of malevolent energy. I took a long sip of wine. The liquid was tart and grounding. My phone was sitting on the counter. I looked at it. Margaret. She had said she was coming tomorrow to help me sort through the junk. She had warned me not to dig. I felt a sudden, perverse impulse to poke the bear. I wanted to see if she would flinch. I picked up my phone. I opened my text thread with her. The last message was from her, sent yesterday. "Don't forget the florist needs the check by Monday." I typed, "Hey Aunt Margaret, I was going through some of Dad's old files tonight. Found some interesting old papers. Some land surveys and bank stuff. Weird." I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. I watched the screen. 1 minute passed, 2 minutes, then the 3 little dots appeared. They danced for a long time. She was typing, then stopping, then typing again. The phone buzzed. "Claire, I told you not to waste your time on that. Daniel was a pack rat. He kept every piece of scrap paper he ever touched. Most of it is garbage. Do not stress about that junk. Seriously, I will be there in the morning. I will help you shred what you don't need. Go to sleep." I stared at the word shred. I will help you shred what you don't need. She didn't ask what papers. She didn't ask what land surveys. She just immediately pivoted to destruction. Garbage. Junk. My mother had locked these papers in a steel box for 32 years. She had paid for it to be protected. She had made a video. That wasn't garbage. And Margaret knew it. I looked at the message again. The tone was casual, breezy, but underneath it, I could hear the steel. It was the same tone she used when she told the funeral director that the oak casket was fine, but the mahogany would have been respectable. It was the tone of someone cleaning up a mess. I put the phone down. I looked at the sealed envelope. For Claire at 30 plus. I took another sip of wine. I wasn't going to shred anything. I reached for the envelope. I slid my finger under the flap. The tape was dry and popped open with a sharp snick. I pulled out the letter. I wasn't a project coordinator anymore. I wasn't just a grieving daughter. I was the surviving child, and I was opening the locked one. The silence in the apartment seemed to deepen, pressing in against the windows. I unfolded the first page of my mother's letter. The handwriting was erratic, hasty, as if she had written it while looking over her shoulder. "My Claire," it began, "when you are old enough to stand on your own." I read the first line, and the room blurred. Margaret was coming in the morning to shred the truth, but she was too late. The paper felt fragile in my hands, like the wing of a dried moth. The ink, once blue, had darkened to a bruised purple over the last 3 decades. The silence in my apartment was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I took a sip of wine, the glass trembling slightly against my lip, and began to read. "My Claire, when you are old enough to stand on your own, when you are strong enough to hold this paper without shaking, though I know you are probably shaking. Because you are my daughter, I hope you can forgive me. I hope you can forgive me for the secrets. I hope you can forgive me for the burden I'm about to place in your hands. If you are reading this, it means I am gone. It means Daniel is gone. And it means the silence we built around you has finally broken." I stopped. The voice was so clear in my head. It wasn't the vague, angelic memory I had constructed over 20 years. It was sharp, intelligent, and terrified. "You need to know where you come from. Claire, not the bedtime story version, but the truth. The Carlyles were never just a family. We were a business. Your grandfather, my father, bought land around Lake Alder when it was nothing but swamp and mosquitoes. He held on to it for 40 years, waiting for the city to expand. He knew it would be worth millions one day. When I got pregnant with you, everything changed. Margaret and I were the only heirs. But Margaret has always believed that control is the only form of love that matters. She convinced our parents that the land needed to be consolidated, put into a trust to protect it from taxes and, frankly, from me. They thought I was soft. They thought Daniel was weak because he worked with his hands and didn't care about boardrooms. They wanted to transfer everything into a family trust that Margaret would control. I refused to sign. I was 8 months pregnant with you. I sat in Father's study, my feet swollen, and I told them I wouldn't sign a single page unless a specific, irrevocable share was set aside for my firstborn child. For you, it was a war. Claire, Margaret screamed that an unborn child didn't need land. She said I was being selfish, that I was jeopardizing the integrity of the estate. But I held my ground. I told them that if they didn't protect your future, I would sue for a partition of the estate right then and there. I threatened to blow the whole thing up. I lowered the letter. I tried to picture my mother, the woman Daniel described as braver than either of us, standing in a study, pregnant and furious, fighting for a child she hadn't even met yet. They caved. The letter continued, or at least, I thought they did. They drew up the papers, the Carlyle Family Trust. It listed you, Claire Henderson, as the beneficiary of 20% of the land holdings, the prime parcels along the east ridge of the lake. Margaret was named as the trustee, to manage it until you turned 21. I thought I had won, but I was naive. I didn't understand that to Margaret. A signature is just a suggestion. I set the letter down and reached for the stack of photocopied documents. They were clipped together with a rusted paperclip that left a brown stain on the top page. I flipped through them. Deed of transfer, Grantor Carlyle Family Trust, Grantee Northbridge Ridge Developments. The date was 1993. I wasn't even born yet. I looked at the signature on the bottom. Margaret Carlyle, trustee. And below that, a second signature. Daniel Henderson. My stomach turned over. I went back to the letter. I found out 6 months after you were born. I went to the county recorder's office to check on a tax issue, and I saw the transfer deeds. Margaret hadn't just managed your share. She had moved it. She had transferred the title of your land out of the family trust and into a new corporation she had formed called Northbridge Ridge Developments. The documents listed her as the majority shareholder and trustee for the benefit of minor Claire Henderson. It sounded legal. It looked legal. But the bylaws of that company, which I found later, gave the trustee absolute power. She could sell, leverage, mortgage, or dissolve the assets without ever notifying the beneficiary. She had effectively stolen your inheritance and hidden it behind a corporate veil. With my parents' blessing, when I confronted her, she laughed. She told me I should be grateful. She said she was building an empire and that you would get a check when you were 40 if you were a good girl. She said if I tried to fight it, she would bury Daniel in legal fees until we lost the house, the car, and everything else. Daniel was terrified. Claire, you have to understand that he loved us, but he was scared of them. He was a warehouse worker going up against a family that had judges for golf partners. He signed the transfers because they told him it was standard procedure. He didn't know he was signing away your future. I felt a hot tear track down my cheek. I wiped it away angrily. Daniel, my quiet, apologized to the furniture father. He had signed. He had helped them do it. We went to a lawyer. Laura wrote, a man named Robert Thorne. He was the family attorney. But he had a conscience. He told me privately that what Margaret had done was a breach of fiduciary duty. But proving it would take years and money we didn't have. He warned me that if I made a move, Margaret would destroy the paper trail. She would claim the files were lost, or that the intent was different. So, he helped me do this. He helped me make copies of the original trust schedules, the unadulterated maps, and the transfer deeds before they could be altered or purged. He gave them to me and told me to hide them. He said, put them somewhere only you and Daniel can open. Someday, the girl will need proof. That is why we went to the bank. Claire, That is why I made you say those words. I needed Daniel to feel the weight of it. I needed him to know that this box wasn't just storage. It was a promise to you. I used you as a witness because I knew Daniel would never break a promise to his little girl. I am sorry. I am so sorry I dragged you into this. I wanted to give you a legacy, and instead, I gave you a war. But I won't let her erase you. I won't let her take what belongs to you and pretend it was charity. If you are reading this, I failed to fix it in my lifetime. It is up to you now. You don't have to fight. You can walk away. But if you want to know who you really are, look at the map. Look at the land. It is yours. Claire. It always was. Love. Mom. I sat back, the letter sliding from my fingers. The room felt different. The air felt charged with electricity. Northbridge Ridge Developments. I knew that name. Everyone in the county knew that name. They built the luxury condos on the waterfront. They built the upscale shopping center where I bought my work clothes. They were the biggest developers in the region. And Margaret was the CEO. I had grown up thinking my aunt was a self-made genius. I thought she had built that company from scratch, through hard work and savvy business deals. But she hadn't. She had built it on land that belonged to me. She had leveraged my inheritance to build her kingdom, and she had given me nothing but hand-me-down sweaters and a guilt trip about how much she helped my father. I reached for the envelope again. There was a smaller note inside, folded into a tight square. It was addressed to Daniel. I unfolded it. The handwriting was different here, scrawled, "Hasty. Daniel, if you are reading this, I am dead. Do not open the box. Do not let Margaret know you have the key. If she knows you have the proofs, she will find a way to destroy them, or she will destroy you. She will act sweet. She will bring casseroles and offer to help with the bills. Do not trust her. She will not hesitate to erase our daughter to protect her company. Keep the box locked. Pay the fee. Wait until Claire is strong enough to understand. If you open it too soon, Margaret will crush you both. Protect Claire. Keep the locked one locked. L." I stared at the note. She will act sweet. I thought of Margaret in my kitchen yesterday. I ordered catering from the Gilded Fork. Consider it my contribution. I thought of her text message tonight. Do not stress about that junk. I will help you shred what you don't need. Daniel hadn't been weak. He had been a sentry. He had been standing guard for 32 years, paralyzed by a warning from his dead wife. He had lived in poverty, paying that $50 fee every April, because he believed it was the only thing keeping me safe from Margaret, erasing our daughter. The phrase chilled me to the bone. I looked at the briefcase. There was still the hard drive. I didn't want to watch it. Reading the words was one thing. Seeing her face was another. It felt like summoning a ghost. But I had come this far. I opened my laptop. I plugged in the small external drive. It whirred to life, a mechanical purr in the quiet kitchen. A folder appeared on my desktop for Claire. I double-clicked it. A single video file. Message, move. I took a deep breath, put on my headphones, and clicked play. The screen flickered. The video was grainy. The resolution of a late 90s camcorder. The color balance was slightly off. Leaning toward yellow, the image resolved. It was our old living room. I recognized the floral couch with the dip in the middle. I recognized the painting of the sailboat that used to hang above the television. And then, there she was, Laura Carlisle Henderson. She was sitting on the edge of the couch. She looked younger than I expected, but also tired. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail. She was wearing a gray sweatshirt that looked too big for her. She looked at the camera. She adjusted the lens. "Is it recording?" she asked. Her voice was tinny through the headphones, but it was the same voice I had heard in my memory of the bank vault. She sat back. She took a deep breath. "Hi, Claire," she said. She smiled, and for a second, she looked exactly like me, the same shape of the mouth, the same way her eyes crinkled at the corners. "If you are watching this, I am not there to explain things," she said, "and that kills me. I hope you are happy. I hope you are loved." She looked down at her hands, twisting a gold ring on her finger. "I am going to keep this short," she said, her voice hardening. Because I don't know how much time I have. Not that I'm sick. I have a bad feeling. Margaret has been calling the house at all hours. She is threatening to sue Daniel for mismanagement of funds if we don't sign over the rest of the rights. Laura leaned forward, staring intensely into the lens. I need you to understand the land. Claire, it is not just dirt. It is leverage. The parcels on the East Ridge, the ones I fought for, they control the water access for the entire development. Without your land, Margaret's project is just a bunch of houses in the woods. With your land, it is a lakeside resort. She held up a piece of paper, the map I had seen in the box. She needs your land to make her millions. Laura said, and she has it. She took it, but the trust documents, the real ones, not the ones she filed, say that you are the beneficial owner. It says that Northbridge Ridge Developments is holding that land for you. She paused. She is going to tell you that you are lucky to have her. She is going to tell you that the family takes care of its own, but if she has total control, she will leave you with scraps. She will give you obligations taxes, fees, debts instead of choices. She will make you dependent on her so you can never ask questions. Laura wiped a hand across her face. I need you to promise me something, she said. Her voice cracked. Promise me you won't let her tell you who you are. Promise me you won't let her tell you what you deserve. You are a Henderson. Yes, but you are a Carlyle too, and you have rights. If you are seeing this, you are probably grown. You are probably scared. Daniel tries, but he is not a fighter. You have to be the fighter. Claire, you have to go to the courthouse. You have to find the original filings. You have to take it back. She leaned in closer until her face filled the screen. Do it for me, she whispered. Do it because she thinks we are weak. Show her we are not. The screen went black. I sat there, the headphones silent against my ears. I wasn't crying anymore. The tears had dried up, replaced by a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I felt manipulated. Yes, I did. My mother had reached out from the grave and drafted me into a war I didn't start. She had put a weapon in my hand and pointed me at her sister. It was unfair. It was cruel, in a way, but it was also the truth. I looked at the documents spread out on the table. Northbridge Ridge Developments. I thought about the family lake trip last summer. I remembered Margaret standing on the deck of her massive cabin, gesturing to the lake with a glass of Chardonnay in her hand. It is a legacy. Claire, she had said, I built this for all of us. You should be proud. She had been standing on my land. She had been drinking wine bought with money generated from my inheritance, and she had looked me in the eye and told me to be proud of her. The anger hit me then. It wasn't the hot, flashing anger of a temper tantrum. It was a slow, grinding tectonic shift. It was the realization that my entire life, my struggle to pay student loans, my father's poverty, his fear had been manufactured. It had been a design choice made by Margaret Carlyle. I stood up. I paced the kitchen. I couldn't do this alone. I was a project coordinator. I knew how to organize spreadsheets. I didn't know how to sue a multi-million-dollar corporation. I needed a shark, or at least someone who knew how to swim with them. I thought about the lawyers in town. Most of them were golf buddies with Margaret's husband. They would call her the second I walked in the door. I needed someone outside her circle, someone hungry. I remembered a conversation from college. My roommate, Amelia, had gone through a messy probate issue with her grandmother's estate. She had raved about a guy, Mark Ellis. She had said, he is not fancy, his office is over a laundromat, but he is honest, and he hates bullies. I grabbed my phone. I searched for the name. Mark Ellis, attorney at law. He was still in Mapleford. His office was on 2nd Street, near the old depot. The website was basic, just a phone number and an email address. I looked at the clock. It was almost midnight. Margaret was coming at 9 in the morning. She was coming to shred the junk if I waited. She would find a way to make me doubt myself. She would gaslight me. She would find the key. I sat back down at the computer. I opened my email. To Mark, Ellis Legal. Subject estate inquiry. Urgent/potential fraud. I typed the subject line and stared at it. Fraud. It was a heavy word. It was a dangerous word. I started typing. Dear Mr. Ellis, my name is Claire Henderson. I was referred to you by Amelia Vance. My father passed away this week, and I have discovered some documents in a safe deposit box that have been sealed for 32 years. The documents appear to show that significant land assets belonging to a trust in my name were transferred without my knowledge to a company called Northbridge Ridge Developments, controlled by my aunt, Margaret Carlyle. My aunt is coming to my house tomorrow morning to help me clean out my father's files. I believe she intends to destroy evidence. I have copies. I have a video, but I don't know what to do. I need help. Please. I read it over. It sounded desperate. It sounded crazy. I hit send. I closed the laptop. I gathered the papers. I put them back in the envelope. I put the envelope and the hard drive back in the briefcase. I couldn't leave them here. If Margaret used her key to let herself in while I was in the shower. I stood up and walked to the pantry. I pulled out the oversized box of cereal, the sugary kind I bought for Emma. I took out the bag of cereal. I shoved the briefcase into the back of the pantry shelf. Behind the slow cooker and the blender I never used, I put the cereal box back in front of it. It was a pathetic hiding place, but it was the best I had. I went into the bathroom and washed my face. I looked in the mirror. My father was right. I did look like her. Around the eyes. Promise me you won't let her tell you who you are. I dried my face. I walked back into the living room and sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the door. I wasn't going to sleep. I was going to wait for Margaret. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the dutiful niece. I was going to be the girl who opened the locked one. The office of Mark Ellis was located on the second floor of a brick building on 2nd Street, squeezed between a dry cleaner and a yoga studio that always smelled of sandalwood. The staircase was narrow and creaked under my boots, a sound that seemed to announce my hesitation to the entire building. I reached the frosted glass door with Mark Ellis, attorney at law stenciled in peeling black letters. I took a breath that rattled in my chest, adjusted the strap of Daniel's heavy leather briefcase on my shoulder, and pushed the door open. The waiting room was small, furnished with 2 beige armchairs that had seen better decades and a coffee table stacked with outdated issues of National Geographic. There was no receptionist, just a bell on a desk and a closed door behind it. I rang the bell. A moment later, the inner door opened. Mark Ellis stood there. He was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, with messy brown hair and a sweater that had a small snag at the collar. He looked less like a high-powered litigator and more like a weary high school history teacher. Claire Henderson, he asked. Yes, I said. Amelia Vance told me to call you. He smiled, a tired but genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Amelia. I haven't seen her since we settled that probate mess. Come on in. His office was chaotic but organized, stacks of files forming little skylines across his desk. The window looked out over the alley, offering a view of a dumpster and a slice of gray sky. It was a far cry from the mahogany-paneled boardrooms Margaret undoubtedly frequented, and for some reason, that made me trust him immediately. I sat down and hauled the briefcase onto my lap. I didn't know how to start. How do you tell a stranger that your entire life might be a lie constructed by your aunt? I have a complicated situation. I began. Mark leaned back in his chair, tenting his fingers. Most people who walk through that door do, he said. Start at the beginning. I opened the briefcase. I took out the map. I took out the trust documents. I took out the letter from my mother. I laid them on his desk like a tarot spread. My father died last week. I said, I found a key. It opened a safe deposit box that has been locked for 32 years. I pushed the letter toward him. My mother wrote this in 1994. She says she owns land, significant land that was put into a trust for me. She says her sister, my Aunt Margaret Carlyle, stole it. Mark's eyebrows went up. He picked up the letter. He put on a pair of reading glasses and the room went silent. The only sound was the ticking of a wall clock and the occasional rustle of paper as he turned a page. I watched his face. I expected him to frown. I expected him to sigh and tell me that 30-year-old letters were sentimental but legally worthless. I expected him to tell me I was grieving and seeing conspiracies where there was only standard estate planning. But he didn't. He read the letter twice. Then he picked up the photocopied deed of transfer. He studied the map. Finally, he looked up. The tiredness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. "Northbridge Ridge Developments?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He let out a low whistle. "That is a serious allegation. Claire, we are talking about the biggest developer in the county." "I know," I said, my voice trembling. "That is why I'm here." He stood up and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a legal pad. "Okay," he said, sitting back down. "Here is the reality. The statute of limitations on fraud is usually 4 years from the date of discovery. Since these transfers happened 30 years ago, a defense attorney would argue you are way too late." My heart sank. "So it is over." "No," he said sharply. "Not necessarily. There are 2 things working in your favor. First, you were a minor when this happened. The clock often doesn't start ticking until you turn 18. But even then, you are 32 now. So we are still outside that window." He tapped the trust document. "But this is the key. Margaret was named as trustee. That creates a fiduciary duty. A trustee has a legal obligation to act in the best interest of the beneficiary, you. That duty doesn't just expire because time passes. If she is still holding assets that belong to the trust, or if she converted those assets into her own company without informing you, that is an ongoing breach. Every day she doesn't tell you is a new violation." He looked at me. "Did she ever provide you with an accounting? Did you ever get a yearly statement from the Carlyle Family Trust?" "Never." I said, "I didn't even know the trust existed until yesterday." Mark nodded, scribbling furiously on his pad. "That is good. I mean, it is terrible, but it is good for us. It is hard to argue the statute of limitations has run out if the trustee actively concealed the existence of the trust." He turned to his computer. "Let me look something up. I have access to the county recorder's digital archives." He typed for a few minutes, clicking through menus. I sat there, gripping the arms of the chair, feeling like I was waiting for a medical diagnosis. "Okay," he muttered. "Here we go. Parcel 4021. He turned the screen toward me. It was a digital record of a property deed. Grantor Carlyle Family Trust. Grantee Northbridge Ridge Developments. Date November 12, 1998. 1998, I whispered. I was 4. Mark pointed to the bottom of the document. "Look at the signatures." I leaned in. There was Margaret's signature bold, looping, confident. Margaret Carlyle, trustee, and below it, smaller, shakier, Daniel Henderson. I stared at my father's name. It looked wrong. The letters were cramped. The H in Henderson trailed off, as if his hand had given up halfway through. "Now look at the notary stamp." Mark said. I looked. State of Ohio, County of Oak Creek. "Oak Creek," I said. "That is 2 hours south of here." My dad never went to Oak Creek. He worked at the warehouse 6 days a week. We didn't even have a car that could make that trip reliably in 98. Mark zoomed in on the signature. "It looks coerced, Claire, or at least heavily pressured. See the ink blot at the start of the D." He hesitated. He held the pen there for a long time before he started writing. I felt a wave of nausea. I could see it. I could see Margaret standing over him in some office in Oak Creek. Maybe a lawyer she hired just for the day. Someone far enough away that nobody would ask questions. I could see Daniel, tired and scared, wearing his work uniform, signing away my future because she told him it was the only way to save the family. Or maybe, the thought crept in, cold and ugly, maybe he took money. I remembered the lean years. I remembered the arguments about bills. I remembered him coming home one day with a new television that seemed to appear out of nowhere. "Did he sell me out?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mark looked at me with sympathy. "We don't know that," he said gently. "The letter from your mother suggests he was terrified of her. Fear is a powerful motivator. Margaret held all the cards. If she told him, 'Sign this or I cut you off completely,' He might have thought he was protecting you by keeping the peace. I looked at the document again. Daniel Henderson. I felt a mix of protective rage and deep, crushing shame. My father, the hero of my childhood, the man who made me pancakes and taught me to ride a bike, had been an accomplice. He had helped them steal from me. And then he had spent 30 years dying of guilt, paying $50 a year to keep a box of evidence he was too cowardly to use. I sat back, feeling the tears prick my eyes. What do we do? I asked. Mark took off his glasses. We don't go in guns blazing, he said. Not yet. If we file a lawsuit today, Margaret will bury us in motions. She has resources we don't. We need to get her to show her hand. He leaned forward. We send a demand letter. We assert your status as the beneficiary of the Carlyle Family Trust. We demand a full accounting of all assets, income, and disbursements from 1994 to present. We don't mention the safe deposit box. We don't mention the map. We just say, Claire Henderson is an adult. She knows she's a beneficiary, and she wants to see the books. What will that do? It will panic her. Mark said simply, if she ignores it, she is violating state trust codes. If she responds and says the trust is empty, we ask where the assets went. If she lies, we catch her. We force her to produce the paper trail. I thought about Margaret. I thought of her at the funeral, fixing the flowers. I thought of the birthday cards with $50 checks signed with a smiley face. I thought of my cousin Haley, who texted me memes and complained about her dating life. If I do this, I said, I lose them. I lose the only family I have left. Mark didn't interrupt. He let the silence hang there. Claire, he said softly, based on what I'm seeing here, you lost them 30 years ago. They just haven't told you yet. The drive home was a blur. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment complex, staring at the steering wheel. I thought about the family lake trip last summer. I had been so grateful. Margaret had rented a pontoon boat. Haley had driven it, laughing, her hair whipping in the wind. We had anchored in a quiet cove on the east side of the lake. This is the best spot, Margaret had said. Sipping her wine, the water is clearest here. I realized now that we had been anchored off the shore of Parcel 4021, my land. She had taken me to my own stolen property and let me thank her for the vacation. The humiliation burned hot in my throat. It wasn't just the money, it was the condescension. It was the way she patted my cheek and told me I was doing so well at my little logistics job, while she built a fortune on the ground my mother had saved for me. I pulled out my phone. I looked at a picture of Emma. She was grinning, holding a sparkler from the 4th of July. Emma deserved better. She deserved the future Laura had tried to give me. I texted Mark, draft the letter. The next 3 days were an exercise in agonizing patience. Mark drafted the letter. He sent it to me for approval. It was cold, formal, and terrifying. Redemand for accounting. Carlyle Family Trust. Dear Ms. Carlyle, please be advised that this firm represents Claire Henderson, beneficiary of the above referenced trust, pursuant to Ohio Trust Code. We hereby demand a full and complete accounting of all trust assets. We sent it via certified mail. I went to the post office with Mark. I watched the clerk peel the green sticker off the backing and slap it onto the envelope. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. It felt like launching a missile. I went back to work. I sat at my desk and tracked shipments. I nodded at my coworkers. I ate a ham sandwich in the break room, but inside, I was vibrating. I checked the tracking number every hour. Out for delivery. Delivered. Signed for by M. Carlyle. She had it. It was Wednesday evening when the explosion happened. I was in the kitchen, chopping carrots for Emma's dinner. Emma was in the living room watching cartoons. The apartment smelled of sautéing onions. My phone rang. The screen lit up. Aunt Margaret? I stared at it. The knife hovered over a carrot. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wiped my hands on a towel. I picked up the phone. Hello, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Claire Elizabeth Henderson. The voice that exploded from the speaker wasn't the polished, society dame voice I was used to. It was a guttural screech. "What the hell is this?" Margaret screamed. "I have a letter here from some ambulance chaser named Ellis." "Is this a joke?" "It is not a joke." "Margaret," I said, gripping the counter. "Mark Ellis is my attorney. Your attorney." She laughed. A harsh barking sound. "You don't need an attorney. Claire, you need a psychiatrist. What is the matter with you, after everything I have done? After I buried your father, after I paid for the reception, you send me a legal threat." "It is not a threat," I said, my voice gaining a little strength. "It is a request for an accounting. I just want to see the records for the trust Mom left me." "The trust," Margaret spat the word like it was poison. "That trust is dead. Claire, it has been dead for 20 years. There is nothing in it. The land was worthless. It was swamp. I had to move it into the development company just to save it from being seized for taxes. I saved your inheritance if you saved it." "Then show me." I said, "Show me the books. Show me how my share of the land ended up in Northbridge Ridge Developments." "You ungrateful little brat," she hissed. "You have no idea how business works. You think you can just waltz in here with some cheap lawyer and demand things. I have lawyers who cost more an hour than you make in a month. I will crush this, Claire. I will sue you for harassment. I will make sure you regret the day you decided to listen to whatever nonsense is in your head." She paused, breathing heavily. "This is because of those papers, isn't it? That junk you found in Daniel's house? I told you to shred it." I didn't answer. "And that ridiculous locked box." She sneered. "I bet you found the key." "Didn't you? Daniel always was a sentimental fool about that box." I froze. I hadn't mentioned the box. I hadn't told her about the key. I hadn't told her about the bank. Mark's letter hadn't mentioned it either. "How did you know about the box?" "Margaret," I asked quietly. The line went silent. The breathing stopped. "I never told you I found a box," I said, pressing my advantage. "And the letter doesn't mention it. So how do you know?" There was a pause, stretching out for 5 agonizing seconds. Then, her voice dropped. It was cold now. Ice cold. "Stop digging in graves. Claire," she whispered, "or you are going to fall in." Click, she hung up. I stood there, the silence of the kitchen rushing back in. My hand was shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. She knew about the box. She knew Daniel had kept it, and she had been terrified of it, that ridiculous locked box. A moment later, my phone buzzed, a text message. "Margaret, you are making a mistake that will destroy this family. Withdraw that letter by tomorrow, or you are dead to us. Do not test me." I stared at the words. Dead to us. She meant Haley, too. She was taking my cousin away. She was drawing the battle lines. I felt a sob rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I looked into the living room. Emma was laughing at the television, oblivious. I couldn't be dead to them. I had to be strong for her. I was about to call Mark to tell him about the slip-up when the phone buzzed again. Voicemail. I frowned. I hadn't heard it ring. It must have come in while I was on the line with Margaret. I checked the number. It was local. But I didn't recognize it. I pressed play. Claire. The voice was older, shaky. It sounded like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "This is Irene Cole. We met, briefly, at the funeral." I pressed the phone closer to my ear. "Irene, the woman who had whispered, 'Your mother thought you would be ready by now. I heard you have hired Mark Ellis.'" The voice continued. "News travels fast in a small town, especially when legal notices start showing up at the Carlisle estate." She paused. I heard the sound of a lighter clicking and a deep inhale. I was the paralegal. "Claire, back in '93, I typed the original trust documents. And I typed the ones Margaret made us file later." My grip on the phone tightened. "I have been watching you grow up from a distance. I saw you at the grocery store sometimes. You look just like Laura." Another pause. "I should have spoken up years ago. I was afraid. Margaret can be very persuasive and very dangerous. But I'm old now, and I don't sleep well. If you are really going to do this, if you are really going to fight her, you need to know how she did it. You need to know about the notary in Oak Creek, and you need to know about the second signature page. I stopped breathing. The notary in Oak Creek. Mark had just found that. How did she know? Come to my house. Claire, bring your lawyer. I live on Elm Street. Number 405. Please come before I lose my nerve. The message ended. I lowered the phone. The kitchen seemed to spin. Margaret had threatened to bury me. She had money. She had power. And she had the narrative of the benevolent aunt. But I had something she didn't have. I had the ghost in the machine. I typed a text to Mark. Meet me at 405 Elm Street. Tonight, we have a witness. I looked at the carrots on the cutting board. I wasn't going to finish making dinner. Ryan, I said, dialing his number. I need you to take Emma. Something has happened. I was done being the project coordinator. I was done being the niece. I was the plaintiff. And I was going to war. The coffee shop was called The Daily Grind, a generic place on the outskirts of Mapleford with laminate tables and the smell of burnt hazelnut syrup. It was raining again, a relentless gray drizzle that streaked the windows and made the neon open sign blur into a red smear. I sat in a booth in the back corner, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea I had no intention of drinking. Mark Ellis sat across from me, his posture rigid, a yellow legal pad ready on the table. We were waiting for Irene Cole. When she walked in, she looked even more fragile than she had at the funeral. She wore a beige raincoat that swallowed her small frame, and she clutched a plastic grocery bag to her chest, as if it contained the crown jewels. She scanned the room, her eyes darting nervously, until she saw us. She hurried over, sliding into the booth next to me. She smelled of rain and mothballs. I am sorry I am late, she whispered. Unwinding a scarf from her neck, I thought I saw a silver Mercedes near my house. It was probably nothing, but I drove around the block 3 times just to be sure. Margaret drives a silver Mercedes, I said, my stomach tightening. I know, Irene said. Her hands were trembling as she placed the plastic bag on the table. She looked at Mark. You are the lawyer I am, Mark said gently. Thank you for coming. Ms. Cole, anything you tell us is privileged. You are safe here. Irene let out a shaky breath. She reached into the bag and pulled out a faded manila folder. It was stained with coffee rings and the edges were soft with age. I kept this in my attic for 30 years, she said. I stole it. Technically. She opened the folder. I worked for Robert Thorne. She began. He was the Carlyle family attorney for decades. He was a good man, mostly, but he was weak. And the Carlyles, well, Margaret Carlyle was a force of nature even back then. She slid a document toward Mark. When your mother was pregnant, Irene said, turning to me, she fought tooth and nail for your share of the land. She forced her parents to create a separate schedule in the trust. Schedule B. It listed specific parcels, the lakefront lots, as belonging to the Claire Henderson Minor Trust. I nodded. I read about that in her letter. Yes, Irene said. But here's what she didn't know, or maybe she suspected it. After you were born, Margaret started coming to the office every week. She would sit in Robert's office for hours. I could hear them arguing through the door. Margaret kept saying that a baby couldn't own development land. She said it was a liability. She said the taxes would eat the family alive. Irene pulled another document from the stack. It was a draft, typed on onion skin paper. She made Robert draft this. Irene said, "It is a management agreement." It essentially gave Margaret, as the trustee, the power to move assets out of your trust and into other entities for administrative efficiency. It was broad, too broad. It stripped you of any control and removed the requirement for her to notify you until you turned 25. I looked at the paper. It was dense legalese. But this isn't illegal, is it? I asked, shifting assets. Mark scanned the page. It is not illegal on its face, he said, but it relies on the trustee acting in good faith. If she moves the assets to protect them, that is one thing. If she moves them to steal them, that is theft. Irene nodded. That was the problem. Robert knew it was a bad idea. He told her it was a conflict of interest because Margaret was also forming her own company. Northbridge Ridge Developments, at the same time. If she moved your land into her company, she was essentially selling it to herself for $0. She reached into the folder again. This time, she pulled out a document that looked different. It had handwritten notes in the margins in red ink. "This is what I wanted to show you," Irene said. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "When you were 2 years old, your mother came in. She was furious. She had found out about the transfers. She demanded that Robert draft an amendment. She wanted to revoke the management agreement. She wanted to reinstate the original terms, which gave you full control the day you turned 21, with mandatory audits every year until then." Irene tapped the paper. "This is that amendment. Laura dictated it herself. It is fierce. It basically strips Margaret of all discretionary power." I looked at the document. Amendment to the Carlyle Family Trust. Restatement of beneficiary rights. "Why wasn't it filed?" Mark asked, looking up. "Because Margaret found out." Irene said. She leaned in closer. "I don't know how she knew. Maybe she had someone else in the office. But the day before Robert was supposed to file this, Margaret came in. She didn't yell. She was very quiet. She told Robert that if he filed this paper, the Carlyle family would pull all their business from the firm. Not just the trust, the corporate accounts, the real estate work, everything. It was 60% of the firm's revenue. She told him he would be bankrupt by Christmas. Irene looked down at her hands. Robert caved. He put this draft in the shred pile. He told Laura there was a procedural delay. He stalled her. And then she died. I said softly. Irene nodded, tears welling in her eyes. She died 2 weeks later. The aneurysm. And after the funeral, Margaret came in and told Robert to destroy the draft. She said, "We don't need to complicate things now. I will take care of Claire." Irene wiped her eyes. I took the file out of the shred bin. She said, "I don't know why. I couldn't let it disappear. I knew what she was doing. She was erasing Laura's wishes, and she was stealing your future." She pushed the folder toward me. "I am sorry I waited so long. Claire, I was a single mother. I needed that job. I was terrified of her." I reached out and took her hand. It was cold and dry. "Thank you," I said. "You are helping me now. That is what matters." Mark picked up the unfiled amendment. He held it up to the light. "This is it," he said, a grim smile touching his lips. "This is the narrative of intent. We can prove Laura wanted to stop the transfers. We can prove Margaret used economic duress to suppress this document. It destroys her defense that she was just managing things for your benefit. She wasn't managing. She was maneuvering." He put the document in his briefcase. "We have enough. Claire, we have the motive, we have the method, and we have the witness. We are filing." I said, "We are filing." Mark agreed. The next 48 hours were a blur of paperwork. Mark worked around the clock, drafting a petition that was less of a legal pleading and more of a declaration of war. Petition to compel accounting, remove trustee, and surcharge for breach of fiduciary duty. It was 20 pages long. It laid out everything. The original trust, the secret transfers to Northbridge Ridge Developments, the unfiled amendment, the lack of accounting for 32 years. It also included a section that made my heart race: allegations of fraud and forgery. We cited the notary stamp from Oak Creek. We cited the shaky signature of Daniel Henderson. We didn't accuse him explicitly, but we noted that the signature appeared to be obtained under duress or by a person lacking capacity. I signed the verification page on Friday morning. Mark filed it electronically at noon. By 4:00, the bomb had detonated. I was at home, trying to assemble a Lego castle with Emma. When my phone rang, it wasn't Margaret. It was a private number. I let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, it rang again and again. Finally, at 10:00 that night, after Emma was asleep, the phone rang a 4th time. This time, the caller ID said Margaret Carlyle. I sat on the couch, the living room dark except for the streetlights filtering through the blinds. I picked up the phone. "Hello, Margaret." There was no screaming this time, no screeching. "Claire, she said. Her voice was wet, thick with tears. I was taken aback. I had braced myself for fury. I wasn't ready for this. How could you? She sobbed. I am sitting here reading this. This filth. Fraud, forgery. Is this what you think of me? It is what the documents show. Margaret, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though my hands were shaking. Documents, she spat, her voice hardening slightly before cracking again. Papers. You are looking at pieces of paper from 30 years ago and thinking you understand what happened. You weren't there. Claire, you were a baby. You don't know how bad it was. Tell me. Then, I said, tell me where the money went. There was no money, she cried. That is what you don't get. Your grandfather left us land. Yes, but he also left us debt. Massive debt. The property taxes alone were drowning us. Laura didn't understand that. She lived in a fantasy world where land was free. I had to save it. I had to move it into the development company so I could get loans to pay the taxes. I mortgaged my own house. Claire, I risked everything to keep that land in the family. And then you kept it. I said, you moved it to Northbridge Ridge, and you never moved it back. You built condos on it and sold them for millions. I built a legacy, she shouted, the tears vanishing, replaced by cold, hard steel. I built the only thing that keeps this family relevant. That company pays for Haley's college. It paid for your father's medical bills. Don't think I didn't help him. Because I did. It is the roof over our heads. And you want to destroy it? You want to bankrupt the company because you feel left out. I don't feel left out. Margaret, I feel robbed. You are dancing on your grandparents' graves. She hissed. They trusted me. They knew I was the strong one. Laura was weak. Daniel was pathetic. I was the only one who could do what had to be done. I am the sacrificial protector of this family. Claire, I have carried you all on my back for decades, and this is my thanks. You didn't carry me. I said, you lied to me. I protected you, she screamed. I kept you from knowing how close we were to ruin. And now you are going to ruin us for real. Her voice dropped to a whisper, icy and terrifying. If you proceed with this lawsuit, Claire, you are destroying everything. Haley will have nothing. The employees at the company will lose their jobs. My reputation will be shredded. Is that what you want? Do you want to be the villain who burned down her own house? I didn't answer. The guilt washed over me, heavy and suffocating. Was she right? Was I being petty? Was I misunderstanding the economics of 1994? But then I remembered the map. I remembered the video of my mother. Promise me you won't let her tell you who you are. I want the truth. Margaret, I said, I just want the accounting. If you did everything right, the books will show it. There was a long silence. You will regret this, she whispered. You have no idea what you have started. The line went dead. The weekend was a nightmare. Margaret's words echoed in my head like a fever dream. Sacrificial protector, dancing on graves. The stress began to bleed into every crack of my life. On Saturday morning, Ryan came to pick up Emma for a trip to the zoo. Emma couldn't find her left sneaker. I tore the apartment apart, throwing cushions off the couch, looking under the bed. Where is it? Emma, I snapped, my voice too loud, too harsh. Why can't you ever keep track of your things? Emma shrank back, her lower lip trembling. I don't know. Mommy. Ryan stepped in, his face tight. Claire, hey, take a breath. It is just a shoe. It is not just a shoe, I yelled, turning on him. It is the chaos. It is the constant mess. I can't handle the mess right now. Ryan, he looked at me, seeing the dark circles under my eyes, the tension in my jaw. This isn't about the shoe, he said quietly. I sank onto the floor, burying my face in my hands. I am sorry. I whispered, I am losing it. Mommy. Emma's small hand touched my shoulder. Are you mad at me? I pulled her into my arms, burying my face in her soft hair. No, baby, never at you. Mommy is just tired, but the guilt ate at me. I was scaring her. I was becoming the volatile, stressed parent my father had been in those lean years. Margaret was already winning. She was turning me into a wreck. On Monday, the unraveling continued at work. I was in the middle of a logistics meeting, reviewing the shipping routes for a new client. My manager, Sarah, asked me for the projected fuel costs. I stared at the spreadsheet, but the numbers swam before my eyes. All I could see were parcel numbers. 4021, 4022. Sarah asked. I blinked. I am sorry. What? The fuel costs, Sarah said, a frown creasing her forehead. I fumbled with my papers. I don't have them calculated yet. I thought we were doing that next week. Sarah sighed, closing her laptop. We discussed this on Tuesday. Claire, you said you would have them today. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. Everyone was looking at me. I am sorry. I stammered. I have had a family emergency. I will get them to you by the end of the day. After the meeting, Sarah called me into her office. Is everything okay? She asked, closing the door. You have been making small mistakes all week. You sent the invoices to the wrong vendor on Thursday. Now this. Do you need some time off? I looked at her concerned face. I wanted to tell her that I was suing my aunt for millions of dollars in stolen land. I wanted to scream, I am fine. I lied. Just settling my father's estate. It is complicated. Take a few days. Claire, she said, you are no good to us if you are burning out. I left the office early. I couldn't go home. The apartment felt like a cage. I drove. Without consciously planning it, I found myself heading north, toward Northbridge, toward the lake. It was a gray, windy day. The trees were bare, their skeletal branches scratching at the sky. I drove past the entrance to the Northbridge Ridge development. The sign was massive stone and timber, with elegant gold lettering. Northbridge Ridge. Luxury lakeside living. I kept driving, down the winding road that hugged the eastern shore. I pulled over at a gravel turnout near the water. This was it. This was the land from the map. I got out of the car. The wind whipped my hair across my face. The lake was choppy, dark steel waves slapping against the rocks. I walked down a narrow fisherman's path toward the water. To my left, through the trees, I could see the backs of the massive cabins Margaret had built. They were mansions, really, walls of glass, stone chimneys, sprawling decks. I remembered last summer. We had been on the deck of the biggest cabin, Margaret's personal retreat. Haley had been leaning against the railing, holding a beer. It is crazy to think this was all just woods once, Haley had said, looking out at the water. Mom is a genius. She rescued this land. Grandpa made some bad deals. You know, he almost lost it all. Mom had to step in and fix everything. Some people in this family don't understand what real responsibility looks like. At the time, I had nodded, feeling a vague sense of inadequacy. I thought she was talking about Laura, or maybe Daniel. I thought she meant that my parents were the irresponsible ones who couldn't handle the burden of wealth. Now, the memory tasted like ash. She hadn't rescued anything. She had stolen it. Real responsibility was apparently code for grand larceny. I walked further, pushing through a tangle of briars. I wanted to get away from the sight of the cabins. I stumbled over something in the brush. I looked down. It was a piece of wood, rotted and half buried in the wet earth. It was an old signpost that had snapped off at the base. I crouched down and brushed away the dead leaves. The paint was peeling, but I could still make out the white letters against the dark green background. No trespassing, property of Carlisle Family Holdings. I stared at it. It was a relic. A tombstone for the company that was supposed to protect me. I looked up. 50 feet away, nailed to a pristine oak tree, was a shiny metal sign, private property. Northbridge Ridge Developments, violators, will be prosecuted. The layering was literal. She had simply built her sign on top of the old one. She had buried the past in the dirt and put up a shiny new facade. I touched the rotting wood of the old sign. This was my land. My mother had fought for it while I was in her womb. She had shouted in a study to keep this dirt for me, and I was letting Margaret bully me into silence because I was afraid of being ungrateful. I stood up. The wind felt colder, but my head felt clear for the first time in days. Margaret could call me whatever she wanted. She could call me greedy. She could call me a villain, but she couldn't call me a liar. I walked back to the car. I wasn't going to back down, let it get messy, let the family shatter. It was already broken. We were just the only ones pretending it wasn't. The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. I spent every evening at Mark's office, preparing. The room was stacked with boxes of discovery documents we had managed to pull from public records, though we were still waiting on the court to force Margaret to open the private books. Mark looked tired. He was rubbing his temples as we sat over a dinner of takeout Thai food. "I need you to be ready for the narrative she is going to spin." "Claire," he said. "What narrative?" "The ungrateful heir narrative," he said. "It is a classic. She is going to paint herself as the matriarch who held the fort. She will say she took on all the risk, did all the work, and paid all the bills. She will say you were a silent, passive beneficiary who contributed nothing." He pointed his fork at me. "Judges are human. They like stability. If Margaret can show that the status quo her running the company has been profitable and stable for 30 years, the judge might be hesitant to unravel it. He might say, okay, maybe there were some technical breaches, but look at the result. Everyone made money. Why break the egg now?" But I didn't make money. I said, "Exactly." Mark said, "That is our pivot. We have to show active deception. We have to show that you weren't just passive, you were blindfolded." He sighed. "And we need to explain Daniel." I flinched. Daniel. Margaret's lawyer is going to argue that Daniel consented to everything. Mark said, "He signed the transfers. He accepted the status quo. Since he was your father and natural guardian, his consent might bind you, at least legally speaking, for the time you were a minor. We have to prove he was coerced." I nodded. I knew this was the weak link. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment, but it felt too small. I needed to be close to him. I drove to the bungalow. I hadn't been there in a week. It smelled stale, the air trapped and heavy. I walked through the rooms, the kitchen where he made coffee, the living room where he watched the news. I went into his bedroom. I opened the closet. His shirts were still hanging there, plaid flannel and blue work shirts. I sat on the floor of the closet, surrounded by the smell of hymn sawdust and Old Spice. I saw a plastic storage bin pushed into the back corner, behind his work boots. I had missed it during my initial search. It was labeled taxes/MISC. I pulled it out. I opened the lid. It was full of receipts, old pay stubs, and user manuals for tools he hadn't owned in 20 years. But at the bottom, there was a small, black spiral-bound notebook, the kind you buy at a drugstore for $1. I opened it. It was a ledger. Handwriting I recognized immediately as his. January, 1999. Received from M $500. Rent. February 1999. Received from M $500. Rent. March 1999. Received from M $500. Rent. I flipped through the pages. The entries went on for years. The amounts increased slowly. By 2010, it was up to $1,000 a month. Rent? Margaret didn't rent anything from Daniel. He owned this bungalow outright. I looked at the amounts. $500 a month, $6,000 a year. I did a quick calculation in my head. The interest on a modest trust fund in 1999 would have been about that much. These weren't rent payments. They were allowances. They were hush money. She was giving him a tiny fraction of the income generated by my land, disguising it as consulting or rent, and keeping the rest. And he had taken it. My heart broke a little more. He had taken the money. But then I saw the writing in the margins. Next to the entry for June 2004, he had written in shaky pencil, "For Claire's braces, I am sorry. Laura." Next to August 2010. "School clothes. Should be hers anyway. God forgive me." And on the last page, dated just 3 months ago. "Tired. She owns it all. I'm just holding the silence." I ran my fingers over the words. Should be hers anyway. He knew. He wasn't a co-conspirator. He was a hostage. He took the scraps she threw him because he couldn't fight her. And he used them to buy me braces and shoes. He lived in shame so I could have straight teeth. God forgive me. I closed the notebook. I clutched it to my chest. The anger I had felt toward him evaporated, replaced by a fierce, protective sorrow. Margaret had turned my father into a beggar in his own life. She had made him complicit in the theft of his daughter's birthright, and she had let him die with that weight on his soul. I stood up. I wasn't afraid of the hearing anymore. I wasn't afraid of the judge or the lawyers or Margaret's tears. I had the letter. I had the map. And now, I had the ledger of his guilt. I was going to court tomorrow. And I was going to make sure that the silence he held for 32 years finally screamed the truth. The county courthouse was a building designed to intimidate. It was all heavy stone, echoing hallways, and the smell of floor wax that couldn't quite mask the scent of old anxiety. I sat at the petitioner's table, my hands clasped so tightly that my knuckles were white. To my left was Mark Ellis, looking surprisingly sharp in a navy suit that he had likely dry-cleaned for the occasion. To my right was Irene Cole, clutching her purse like a shield. Across the aisle, the atmosphere was different. Margaret sat there. She was wearing a cream-colored suit that looked like it cost more than my car. Her posture was perfect, spine straight, chin up, eyes fixed on the judge's empty chair. Beside her sat Haley, looking bored and slightly annoyed, scrolling on her phone under the table. And next to them was their attorney, a man named Sterling, who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that produced sharks. He was relaxed, almost smiling, radiating the smug confidence of a man who knew that complexity was the enemy of justice. He had 3 assistants behind him, organizing stacks of binders that looked like a fortress wall. We had 1 binder and a small, black notebook. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Eris Thorne entered. He was an older man with a face like a crumpled map and eyes that were sharp and unamused. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked at the 2 tables. "We are here for the matter of the Carlyle Family Trust," he said. "Petition for accounting and removal of trustee. Mr. Ellis, you may proceed." Mark stood up. He didn't have the polish of Mr. Sterling. He didn't use big words. He simply laid out the timeline. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is about a promise broken for 32 years. It is about a trustee who treated a fiduciary duty as a suggestion and a beneficiary who was systematically erased from her own legacy." He called Irene Cole to the stand. Irene walked up slowly. She looked small in the witness box, but when she swore to tell the truth, her voice was clear. "Ms. Cole," Mark asked, "can you describe your role at the law firm of Thorne and Associates in 1994? I was the senior paralegal for Robert Thorne." She said, "I handled the Carlyle family accounts." "And were you present when the trust documents for the minor child, Claire Henderson, were drafted?" "I was." "Can you tell the court what the intent of those documents was?" Mr. Sterling stood up. "Objection. Hearsay. Overruled." The judge said, "I want to hear the witness's understanding of the drafting process." Irene took a breath. She looked at Margaret, then looked away. Laura Carlyle, the petitioner's mother, insisted that specific land parcels be set aside for her unborn child. She said she was afraid her family would cut the child out. She forced them to create a schedule of assets that was irrevocable. "And what happened after Laura Carlyle died?" Mark asked. "Margaret Carlyle came to the office," Irene said. "She pressured Mr. Thorne to draft new management agreements. She said the baby didn't need land. She said she needed to move the assets to protect them. She made us draft transfers moving the land into her own company, Northbridge Ridge Developments. Did you agree with this?" Irene shook her head. "No. I told Mr. Thorne it was a conflict of interest. He knew it too. But Margaret threatened to pull the family's business. She told him he would be ruined." Mark walked to our table and picked up the faded folder Irene had given us. "Ms. Cole, do you recognize this document?" "I do," she said. "It is an unfiled amendment. Laura Carlyle came in 2 weeks before she died. She found out about the management scheme. She demanded we draft this to revoke Margaret's powers and restore full control to Claire. Why was it never filed?" "Because Margaret stopped it," Irene said. Her voice wavered, but she pushed through. She told Robert to bury it. And after Laura died, she told him to destroy it. I saved it from the shredder. Mr. Sterling stood up for cross-examination. He buttoned his jacket and smiled a predator's smile. Ms. Cole, he said smoothly, you were fired from Thorne & Associates in 1996. Were you not? I was laid off, Irene said. Right, laid off. And you have harbored some resentment toward the Carlyle family since then, perhaps felt you were treated unfairly. I have harbored the truth, Irene said sharply. Isn't it true that you are misremembering the chaos of that time, Mr. Sterling asked. Isn't it true that these so-called drafts were just notes, ideas discussed but never finalized because Laura herself changed her mind? No, Irene said. She didn't change her mind. She died. So you say, Sterling said, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. Mark called me to the stand next. Walking to the witness box felt like walking across a tightrope. I could feel Margaret's eyes on me, burning holes in the back of my blouse. Claire, Mark said, when did you find out you owned land 10 days ago? I said, when I opened a safe deposit box my father had kept locked since I was born. Mark walked to the evidence table. He picked up the thumb drive. Your Honor, I would like to submit Exhibit C, a video recording found in the safe deposit box, dated October 1994. The judge nodded. Mark played the video on the large screens in the courtroom. The room went silent. And then, my mother's voice filled the air. Promise me you won't let her tell you who you are. I watched Margaret. For the first time, her mask slipped. She stared at the screen, at the face of her dead sister, and her mouth tightened into a thin, pale line. She looked away. When the video ended, Mark turned to me. Claire, he asked softly, did Margaret Carlyle ever tell you that you were a beneficiary of a trust? No. Did she ever show you an accounting of the profits from Northbridge Ridge Developments? No. How does it feel to know that the company she claims she built was built on your inheritance? I took a breath. My hands were shaking, so I gripped the railing of the stand. It feels like theft, I said. But it is worse than that. It is the manipulation. I grew up thinking we were poor. I watched my father count pennies for groceries while Margaret went on vacations paid for by my land. She let me believe she was saving us, when she was actually living off of me. She decided my reality for me. She decided I wasn't smart enough or strong enough to know the truth. I looked directly at Margaret. She didn't protect me. She managed me. Mr. Sterling didn't cross-examine me much. He knew that attacking a grieving daughter who just played a video from her dead mother was a bad look. He asked a few questions about my father. Did Daniel ever mention the land? Did he seem happy with Margaret's help trying to establish that my father had consented to the arrangement? That was when Mark played his ace. Your Honor, Mark said, the defense claims that Daniel Henderson, the petitioner's father and natural guardian, consented to these transfers. They claim he was a willing partner. Mark picked up the small black notebook. We found this in Daniel Henderson's personal effects. It is a ledger. He walked the notebook up to the judge. Your Honor, please look at the entries. Every year, Margaret Carlyle paid Daniel Henderson a sum of money. She called it rent, but Mr. Henderson owned his home. The judge put on his reading glasses. He flipped through the pages. Mark continued. The amounts match almost exactly the statutory interest rate for the value of the trust assets at the time. This wasn't rent. It was a payoff, a silence fee, and, Mark added, his voice dropping, please read the margin notes. The judge read them silently. Then he looked up. He looked at Margaret. His expression was unreadable, but the air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. God forgive me. The judge read aloud. He closed the notebook. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, explain to me why a willing partner in a legitimate business transaction would write God forgive me next to a payment from his sister-in-law. Sterling stood up, adjusting his tie. He looked slightly less smug now. Your Honor, these are the scribblings of a man who was clearly depressed. We cannot infer legal intent from margin notes. The fact remains that Margaret Carlyle took a failing asset swampland that was drowning in tax debt and turned it into a profitable enterprise. She saved the family fortune. She stabilized the assets. He gestured to Margaret. My client is a heroine, Your Honor. She took on the risk. She put up her own credit. She built Northbridge Ridge from the ground up. Claire Henderson is simply a young woman who stumbled onto a dusty box with half-baked ideas from a mother who didn't understand business. And now she wants to cash out on 30 years of my client's hard work. It is classic unjust enrichment. The hearing ended with closing statements. Mark was brief. He asked for the law to be followed. Sterling was flowery. He asked for common sense and the preservation of the status quo. The judge retired to his chambers to review the evidence. The hour we waited was the longest of my life. The courtroom was silent. Margaret didn't look at me. Haley was chewing a fingernail, looking from her mother to me with wide, frightened eyes. Finally, the bailiff opened the door. All rise. Judge Thorne sat down. He didn't look at his notes. He looked directly at Margaret. Ms. Carlyle, he said, the role of a trustee is the highest duty known to the law. It requires absolute transparency. It requires loyalty. He picked up the unfiled amendment. You didn't just fail in that duty. You actively subverted it. You used economic threats to suppress the grantor's intent. You moved assets into a company you controlled. You failed to provide a single accounting in 32 years. He looked at the notebook. And you purchased the silence of the co-guardian with crumbs from the table. Margaret went pale. I find that you have committed a gross breach of fiduciary duty. The judge announced. He turned to the clerk. I am ordering the immediate removal of Margaret Carlyle as trustee of any assets connected to the Claire Henderson Trust. I am ordering a full independent forensic audit of Northbridge Ridge developments, going back to 1994. The cost of this audit will be borne by Margaret Carlyle personally. Margaret gasped. Furthermore, the judge continued, based on the preliminary evidence of the land values, I am issuing a constructive trust over the Northbridge Ridge entity. Until the audit is complete, no assets may be sold or transferred, and I am flagging for the final judgment that Claire Henderson is entitled to restitution that may very well exceed the current value of her original share. He looked at me. Ms. Henderson, this likely means you will end up with a controlling interest in the development company, or a judgment lien that will force its liquidation. I nodded, feeling the breath rush out of me. But, the judge said, raising a hand, there is one more matter. He looked at the papers in front of him. The evidence presented here suggests more than just civil liability. The forged notary stamp from Oak Creek, the coercion of Daniel Henderson, the systematic concealment of assets. These are potential criminal acts. Fraud, forgery, embezzlement. The room went deathly still. Margaret made a sound, a small, strangled whimper. Ms. Henderson, the judge said to me, the court has the discretion to refer this matter to the district attorney for criminal investigation. If I do so, the state will likely pursue charges. Your aunt could face significant prison time. He leaned forward. While I can make this referral on my own, in family trust cases, I give significant weight to the wishes of the beneficiary. You are the victim here. He paused. Do you wish for this court to refer Margaret Carlyle for criminal prosecution? I stared at the judge. Then I turned my head slowly to look at Margaret. She wasn't the Iron Lady anymore. She was slumped in her chair, her face gray, her eyes wide with terror. She looked old. She looked exactly like the terrified woman she had always accused my father of being. I looked at Haley. She was crying silently, her hand covering her mouth. I thought about the anger in my mother's video. Show her we are not weak. I thought about Daniel's notebook. I am sorry. Laura. I thought about the last 30 years, the lies, the condescension, the theft. A part of me, a dark, hot part, wanted to say yes. I wanted to see her in handcuffs. I wanted to see her stripped of everything, locked in a cell, just as she had locked my truth in a box. I wanted to be the person she said I was vindictive. But then I looked at Emma's picture on the screen of my phone, sitting on the table. If I sent Margaret to prison, I became the destroyer. I became the person who used power to crush family. Margaret had spent her life manipulating the truth to control outcomes. She had played God with our lives. If I made this decision based on vengeance, I was playing God too. I stood up. My legs felt steady, Your Honor. I said. The courtroom held its breath. My aunt spent 30 years building a lie. I said, she stole my past. She stole my father's dignity. I looked at Margaret. She flinched. I want the audit. I said clearly. I want every penny that is owed to me. I want her removed from the company. I want her name off the deeds. I want her to never have power over me or my daughter again. I took a deep breath. But I will not be the one to put her in a cage. I am not her. I turned back to the judge. I want the truth exposed, Your Honor. The full audit will do that. If the authorities see that audit and decide to press charges, that is the consequence of her actions. But I will not ask for it. I won't stand in the way of the truth, whatever it requires, but I won't use the law for revenge. I just want what is mine. The judge looked at me for a long moment. A flicker of respect crossed his face. So ordered, he said. The referral will be stayed pending the results of the audit. The chips will fall where they may. He banged his gavel. Court is adjourned. Margaret slumped forward, burying her face in her hands. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. I walked out of the courtroom. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt light. The weight of the secret, the weight of the anger, was gone. 3 weeks later, the leaves were stripped from the trees, and the air in Mapleford was crisp and cold. I parked my car in front of Alder Community Bank in Northbridge. Emma was in the back seat, kicking her legs. Are we going to see the nice lady, she asked. Yes, baby, I said. We are. I unbuckled her and took her hand. We walked into the bank. Joan Miller was waiting for us. She looked relieved to see me. Claire, she said, coming around the desk. I am so glad you came. You said you found something I asked. Yes, she said. When the court order came through to release the full records of the box for the audit, we did a deep inventory. I don't know how we missed it before. It is a false bottom, a secondary compartment. She led us to the vault. It was strange to be back. The last time I was here, I was terrified. Now, I walked in as the owner of Northbridge Ridge Developments, or I would be. Once the lawyers finished the paperwork, Joan pulled out the long metal box. She placed it on the table. She reached inside and pressed a small latch at the very back. The metal floor of the box popped up. Underneath, there was a thin space, and inside that space was a single envelope. It was smaller than the first one. It wasn't white. It was pale blue. There was no writing on it, just a drawing. A hand-drawn heart, sketched in black ink. I reached out and took it. It felt light. There was a note paper-clipped to it, a bank form. Note for file box 402. Date, October 15th, 1994. That was one day after the original envelope was sealed. One day before my mother died. Instruction for Claire. If she chooses to know more. I stared at the envelope. If I chose to know more, my mother had left the legal proof in the main box. She had left the war in the main box. But she had hidden this. What was it? A confession. A secret about my father. A secret about herself. Maybe there was a reason Margaret hated her so much. Maybe there was a reason the grandparents sided with Margaret. I held the envelope. I had spent the last month fighting for the truth. I had unraveled the knot of my family's history. I had won. But did I need to know everything Daniel had said? Some doors, once opened, can't be shut again. I had opened the big door. I had walked through the fire. I looked down at Emma. She was standing on her tiptoes, trying to peek into the metal box. She looked up at me, her eyes bright and curious. "Mommy," she asked, pointing to the blue envelope in my hand. "Is that the locked one?" She smiled, innocent and eager. "Are you going to open it?" I looked at the heart on the envelope. I looked at my daughter. I realized that for 32 years, my life had been defined by what was hidden. I slipped the blue envelope into my pocket. "Not today. Emma," I said softly. I took her hand. "Let's go get some ice cream." We walked out of the vault, leaving the heavy steel door open behind us. The air outside was cold, but the sun was finally breaking through the clouds. Thank you for listening to this story. The saga of Claire Henderson and the Carlisle fortune may have reached a legal conclusion, but families are rarely that simple. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the secrets that bind us and the truths that set us free. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. Are you in a bustling city like Mapleford, or somewhere quiet near a lake? And if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Revenge Stories for more tales of justice, betrayal, and the long road to redemption. Share your thoughts in English. What do you think was in the blue envelope? Would you have opened it? Until next time, keep your keys close and your secrets closer.